Okay, so now we have all of the images that we imported into After Effects organized nicely into a folder. First thing we want to do is bring in a new image into our composition once a composition has been created. So I've created a 1080p composition, which is right here. So we double click it, it brings us into this blank composition. I will bring in an image that I like, or a piece of footage. Now we have a white background, but I would like this to be scaled to full screen. So I will hit S on the keyboard. I will scale this a little past the full screen mark. We can go to Layer, New, Camera. We will keep the preset to 35. We will click OK. Everything else is fine for now. Now, until this layer turns into a 3D layer, the camera will not be able to control it. So on this layer, let's turn it into a 3D layer. And now the camera will be able to control the layer. We can go down into the drop menu here, inside Transform. And on the position layer, we can see that the right side starts moving to the back. Or if we go the other way, the left side starts moving to the back. Let's undo that, Command Z. Or we can go to Orientation and click this, for example, and move it to the left and move it to the right. Now it's important to understand that this is the actual camera, a virtual camera, moving around and not the image. For example, if we go to the Z rotation and click and drag, the image appears to start rotating. It's important to understand that the image is actually not rotating, it's the camera that's rotating. Much like if you held a camera handheld and started rotating the camera, the image produced would be spinning. Okay, let's Command Z and undo that back to the original. And from here we can create a simple animation. So on the position, we will click on the stopwatch, which creates a keyframe. On the left side here, we will click and drag until the edge of the screen, which you can see right here. If we go a little further, the white is introduced, so we want to hide the white. And if we click and drag and place our timeline cursor at the end of the composition, and then click and drag the other direction until the white is shown, and then go back a bit, then over time, the image will appear to be turning in 3D space. Okay, so the next thing we can do is add a fake camera movement to the image. So we have an image file brought into a composition. We can go down into the Transform section and under the Position property, and under the Position property, we can, on a Mac, Option click, or on a PC, Alt click the stopwatch here, which opens up the section where you can type or copy and paste an expression. So for now we can delete what is there. We can type in WIGGLE bracket 1, 20 close bracket. Now this is a very standard expression, and basically what it does is it moves the image around randomly a certain amount of pixels over a certain amount of time. And it looks like this. We can exaggerate it by changing these numbers here. So we can go, for example, 5 for the second number and 20 for the first number. And it's almost like an earthquake. So this is cool for adding an earthquake type effect to footage you have or photos. For our purposes, we're looking for a simple camera shake, as if we were holding the camera handheld. So 1 and 20 works for us. We can even go a step further in adding a bit of rotation, as if the camera is swaying a bit from left to right as your shoulders move when you're standing and holding the camera. To do that, under the rotation property, we option click the stopwatch. We remove the text by clicking backspace. We type in WIGGLE bracket 1, comma 2, close bracket. Now this will add a slight bit of rotation randomly to the clip over time. So that mixed in with the position expression will produce a nice handheld feel to a single shot that otherwise had no movement. If you feel that that is too much, then you can always reduce it by going to 0.5 for the first value and 1 for the second one, for example. Or if you prefer even a little less, you could do 0.5 for the second one and go back to the original position and change the second to 10. Let's press 0 and check that out. So that's a little more subtle. And that is how you can add an expression to the position and rotation properties to give a random camera shake feel to your footage or photos. Just remember, you need to scale it a little larger as the camera moves around. Otherwise, you might reveal the edges beyond your picture or footage. Okay, welcome back. In this lesson, we will be making a motion graphic title. Okay, let's get started. In composition, 1080p, 10 seconds. Okay. Okay, we will create a new solid. It'll be light blue. Make comp size. Okay. We'll click it. We will press enter and we'll call this background. Enter. We will then create new text and we will call this motion graphic. We will increase the size of this to around 100. We will then center this by going to proportional grid and once again lining up the red squares with that line and these red squares with that line. We will center the anchor point. Go back to the selection tool. We will turn off the proportional grid. So the next thing we can start doing is animating. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go into transform, scale, make a keyframe, and then at the very beginning we're going to place it to 0. So what this does so far is it scales up all the way to there. Then what I want it to do is up until 9 seconds I want it to slowly grow. So it'll just be about to there. And then from that point on, I want it to take off and zoom right past the camera. So what that's going to do is it's going to go all the way. It's going to keep going. And if you want, actually, you can hold shift and it'll speed up the grow much faster. All the way to that. So it just turns to black. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all the keyframes and make sure that there is no auto Bezier selected, which there is not, so we are good. We will make this one easy ease in. We will make this one easy ease out. So right now it goes like that, then it's slow grow, then it goes shoo. So the way that looks, slow grow for a few seconds. And then it zooms out quickly. Now the way the text is centered right now, it doesn't look the best for when it zooms out. So if we wanted to fix that, another cool way is you could go make a position frame there, and then at the end you could just move it to the right. And the way that looks is like that. It moves all, it's just a slow zoom in, and then it goes like that. So what we could do is you could even go a little further. Now if we click here and scroll out, we can see where it is now. So if we wanted, we could even make it go a little further, which would help with the animation. Okay, so let's go to fit. Okay, the next thing we can do is add a fast blur to our text. Turn on the keyframe, set it to 25, then move our timeline cursor to 1 second in, change our fast blur to 0, then we can go to the end, and then open up the text, effects, fast blur, and then right here we can make another keyframe that's exactly the same as the last, and then we will go to the very end, and then we will set either down here or up here back to 25. So the idea is it starts out of focus and comes in, and then it leaves out of focus just a bit though, but because it goes so quick out of screen, it might make sense to do it right there. So let's move that off so the animation happens quicker for the fast blur. Okay, so if we want to exaggerate that, we can make this up to 100, for example. So it goes. Okay, so we can actually delete that, and here's another way to do that. So another thing we can do is use the After Effects built-in motion blur. So let's turn on the master motion blur button, and then on the motion graphic text layer, let's turn on motion blur, and then we'll see here at the very end by press 0 here, it adds some slight motion blur based on the keyframe animation on that layer. I like using the fast blur as opposed to the built-in motion blur inside After Effects, because with the fast blur you actually get a little more control and you're able to blur it as much as you'd like. Alright, that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Alright, so there are a few other ways we can add some effects to this to make it look a little better. One way is creating a vignette around the outside of our frame to draw the attention into the middle. So to do that, we create a new solid layer. We make it black, go to OK. Then we go to the ellipse tool and we double click it. Now inside the mask here, it's already highlighted. We click on either subtract or we go to inverted. From there we open up the tab and then we start moving around these parameters. Okay, so that's okay, and then we will go to maybe a little less. Do something like that. Okay, let's rename this vignette. And let's toggle it off and on so we can see what it does. Just adds a little bit of depth. The next thing we can do is add a hotspot in the middle. Let's do solid. Let's make it white. Let's go to OK. And then we'll do the exact same thing. Double click. But this time we don't need to invert it. We'll just open it up. And we can go all the way out. Do something like that, but this time mask expansion. We'll make it much smaller. And then we can start rolling that back until we get something we like. So that's okay for now. And then what we'll do is we'll place that, we'll click and drag it and place it below. And the vignette will be behind as well. Let's tweak some colors a little bit. Let's go to solid settings on the background layer and let's make it a nicer color. Okay, let's make the white solid slightly off-white, slightly into the blues a little bit. Okay, another thing we can do is go up here and type in flare, generate lens flare, and we will place it on our title. Now what this does when placed over a text effect is it creates a lens flare that only shows up inside the letters, and you can actually animate it from one side all the way through it. So this is a great way to have some light and change of color moving through your text. So the first thing we want to do is go to about there, place the flare center somewhere around here, somewhere along the bottom. And then as we animate across, the top part of the flare will pass through it. So we just have to try to find the sweet spot. So let's go up there, and that looks good. Okay, so we'll start there. Okay, we will turn on the flare brightness and the flare center. And then we will go to the very end. And then we will move the flare all the way across. And all the way to the top. So through the text it goes like that all the way through it. So let's go to the middle here. And we'll change the brightness to about that. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll go to the beginning and we will watch it. Okay, and that brings us to the end of this lesson. We created a very basic motion graphic title. That is pretty much the starting point to all motion graphic titles, where you have some animation with a text file, you have some gradient colors in the background, and you have some sort of color change throughout the text. Alright, and in the next lesson we will see how to address the issue with the banding here that it's going on in the background. Okay guys, let's get right into it. So banding occurs when you have low bit depth or when you just have colors that just don't blend properly. So for example here we're seeing a whole bunch of banding lines as the color changes to the white. Alright, so there's a few ways we can address these issues, and the first one is the bit depth. So in here we can simply up the bit depth to 16 or 32, and that should help with the banding a little bit. However, it sometimes introduces other problems, such as certain effects only work with 8-bit. So instead of doing that, let's set it back and we'll fix it another way. Let's go to Layer, New, and Adjustment Layer. An adjustment layer typically sits above another layer where you add an effect to it, and that effect affects the other layers below it. So let's go over here and type in grain. Let's add grain to the adjustment layer. We will change the viewing mode to final output. Then we will play around with the intensity until we're happy with it. So right now it's a little too much, so we can go down to 0.3 maybe. Because movies are created using cameras tend to have grain in them already. And so our eyes are naturally accustomed to seeing grain. So I would recommend adding grain to every After Effects project you work on. Don't overdo it, but 0.1, 0.2 on the intensity, or 0.1 or 0.2 on the size will just give it a little bit more raw, real feeling to the motion graphic that you created. Welcome back to another lesson here. Okay, let's get right into it. This one will be on pre-composing. Pre-composing is when you have a composition inside another composition, or a sequence inside a sequence. Much like Premiere Pro, where you have a nested sequence inside your regular sequence timeline. Okay, so let's say we wanted to do some overall effects and graphics work to this entire piece. We could add some stuff to the adjustment layer to affect all the layers below, but there's another way that's a little more effective, that has a little more control, and that is pre-composing. So what we do is select all the layers. We can either go down here and press Command A, or we can click one, hold Shift, and click the top. Then we can go to Layer, we can go to Pre-compose. Okay, so what we have here is a panel with a few different options. Up at the top we can name our pre-comp. I normally keep pre-comp in the word so that we can tell that this one will be inside our other composition. So let's call it motion graphic pre-comp. For this, we want to move all attributes into the new composition. We press OK. So we can see down here that we have a composition inside our comp1 composition. Okay, so now let's name comp1. So we'll go up here, we'll press enter, and we'll type in main. So now we know this is our main composition, and if we double click down here, it'll open up our pre-composition. So now we have two compositions, and this one sits in this one. And again, double click it, we'll open it up so you can edit the original composition. Okay, so let's go to the main. Now on this layer, this is where we can start adding effects, such as color correction. For example, we can go up here to the effects, type in curves, drag it down, and just like a finished video file, this right here includes all of the layers in one layer, so everything will be affected. So let's go to our effect controls panel now that we've added the curves effect to this layer, and let's make some adjustments. So in the low ends here we can kind of darken it a little bit, and the highs we can push it up a bit to give it some contrast. Okay, to cycle that, that's the difference. So that affects everything. Okay, so that's an effect we can do to add more contrast. Let's remove that. Let's say we wanted to remove some of the color. We could go to tint, drag it down. For now, we will keep it at 100. We will turn on the stopwatch, which adds a keyframe. We can go to 1 second and 12 frames. We will change our amount to tint to 0. We will click on this layer and press U, which will bring up all of the keyframes on that layer. Right now we have 2. Okay, at 8 seconds and 12 frames we will create another keyframe that is the same as this one at 0. Then we will hit end on our keyboard to go to the end of our composition, and we will go up to our tint and put that back to 100%. Okay, so let's go to the beginning of our composition. Now, because there's a pre-comp and because we're adding effects on a composition that includes many layers inside that have their own effects, this can make your system a little sluggish. So in order to make it go a little quicker, we can go to our resolution here and set it to half, third, or quarter. For now, let's set it to third. And when we scrub through, we should be able to see it a little more responsive than if it was set to full. But you can see it isn't working. Okay, so if we set to, let's say, a quarter, then it makes it a little easier to reference what we're doing, but there's a little bit of quality loss, as you can see, compared to full. Okay, so let's set it to a quarter. Okay, so we have our composition starting out in black and white here. As the text comes in, it changes the color. We then have our sun flare going through our text as our text grows a bit, and then as the text zooms out, it goes back to black and white. So that's a pretty straightforward effect using tint to give a cool little intro and outro. Okay, so in this lesson we will discuss how to use a mask to hide and reveal a text layer. So let's go into Motion Graphics Pre-Comp. Let's go to the middle so we can see our motion graphic text. We will select our motion graphic text, and while this layer is selected, we will go up to our pen tool and we can draw a rough box around it, and then complete it by clicking the original point. Okay, let's go back to our selection tool. Okay, right now we have an outline around our text, but it's not doing anything just yet. So with our text layer selected, Let's hit MM on our keyboard. That'll open up the mask properties. Then click the stopwatch for mask path. That will create a keyframe right here. We will go back about a second or so. Then we will click one of the points here and hold, press shift, and then drag it away. So now basically what that's showing is over here we have the mask, but the text still exists here, but the mask is hiding it. So technically, if we turn the mask off to none, the text still exists there, but what we're doing is we've taken the mask and we've moved it away, so you cannot see the text anymore. Okay, so basically because we've created two keyframes here, when we moved it over, it created another keyframe. So if we go across this, it'll start revealing. So okay, so that looks okay, but what we want is for it to happen the other way. So what we can do is we can highlight that keyframe, press delete to remove it, so now we have no animation. Okay, we can go back a second, and now because the mask isn't selected, meaning the points aren't little squares, we have to select all of them. So right now we've selected one, the other ones are just a frame of a little square, if you can see that. So if by selecting one we can select all of them like that, now it's ready to go like we were before. So click and hold. Let's try this one. Hold shift and drag it out this way. So now what that does is it reveals it left to right, so it's a little easier to read. Just to give you an idea of the different parameters you can do, if we set this to subtract, this is what happens. You see the text starting at the beginning, and then the mask actually ends up hiding it. So you can get really creative here with all these different ideas to come up with your own unique motion graphic.
To see the horizon, turn us to thousands.